David Chen had been dreaming about this moment for almost 3 years. At 58 years old, after spending more than 3 decades building and running his landscaping company, he was finally ready to slow down. He'd sold the business for a good price, and now he had one clear goal in mind: find a place where he could fish every single morning without anyone bothering him. Growing up, David's happiest memories were the weekends he spent with his grandfather at a small pond near their hometown. They'd wake up before sunrise, pack some sandwiches, and spend hours by the water. His grandfather taught him that fishing wasn't really about catching fish. It was about the quiet, the peace, the way the world felt different when you were sitting by the water with a line in your hand. Now, after all those years of running a business, dealing with clients, managing employees, and constantly being on the phone, David wanted that peace back. He wanted his own little piece of heaven where he could just breathe. The search hadn't been easy. David looked at dozens of properties across Northern Virginia. Some had ponds that were too small. Others had neighbors too close. A few had nice water features, but they were part of those fancy housing developments where everyone knew everyone's business. That wasn't what he wanted at all. Then one Tuesday afternoon, his real estate agent called with excitement in her voice. She'd found something special. 15 acres with a natural spring-fed lake, completely private, surrounded by trees and far enough from the main roads that you couldn't even hear the traffic. David drove out there that same evening. The moment he turned off the county road onto the long gravel driveway, he felt something shift in his chest. Tall oak trees lined both sides of the path. Birds were singing. The air smelled like pine and fresh earth. And then, as he rounded the final bend, he saw it. The lake was bigger than he'd expected, maybe 2 acres of clear, calm water. The late afternoon sun made it sparkle, like someone had scattered diamonds across the surface. There was a gentle slope down to the water's edge, perfect for building a dock. Trees surrounded 3 sides of the lake, giving it that secluded feeling he'd been searching for. On the far side, he could see a great blue heron standing perfectly still in the shallows. David got out of his car and just stood there for a long moment. He walked down to the water's edge and dipped his hand in. It was cool and clean. He could see all the way to the bottom in the shallow parts. This was it. This was exactly what he'd been looking for. The next morning, he called the seller and made an offer. It was a fair price, maybe even a little generous, but David didn't care. He'd been looking for 3 years, and he wasn't going to lose this property over a few $1,000s. The seller accepted that same day. Now, David wasn't the type to rush into things, especially not something this important. He'd learned over the years that doing things right the first time saved you headaches later. So before the sale closed, he hired a professional surveyor to come out and mark every single corner of the property with iron stakes. He wanted to know exactly where his land began and ended. The surveyor spent 2 full days walking the property with his equipment. When he was finished, he gave David a detailed map showing all 15 acres. The lake sat right in the middle of the property, completely within David's boundaries. Not a single inch of that water belonged to anyone else. David also hired a lawyer who specialized in real estate. Her name was Lisa Patterson, and she came highly recommended. He paid her to go through every single document related to the property with a fine-tooth comb. He wanted to make sure there were no surprises, no hidden problems, no restrictions he didn't know about. Lisa spent a week reviewing everything. The deed was clean. There were no liens on the property, no easements that would let people cross his land, no mineral rights issues, no disputes with neighbors, and most importantly, no homeowners association restrictions. Nothing in any of the paperwork mentioned an HOA. When Lisa gave him the green light, David felt a wave of relief wash over him. He paid for the property in cash, signed all the papers, and got his keys. The lake was his. The land was his. He could finally start living the life he'd worked so hard to earn. The first few months were pure joy. David woke up every morning at sunrise and walked down to the lake with his fishing rod and a thermos of coffee. He'd spend 2 or 3 hours there, watching the mist rise off the water, listening to the birds wake up, and occasionally catching a fish or two. The previous owner had told him there were some bass and bluegill in there, and David could confirm that was true. But David wanted to make the place his own. He hired a local contractor to build a simple wooden dock that stretched about 20 feet into the water. Nothing fancy, just treated lumber, sturdy posts driven deep into the lake bottom, and a nice wide platform at the end where he could sit in his folding chair. The contractor did good work and the whole project was finished in less than 2 weeks. Next, David decided to stock the lake with more fish. He contacted a fish hatchery and ordered a batch of largemouth bass and some rainbow trout. The delivery truck came on a cool morning in early spring, and David helped the workers release the fish into the lake. It felt good, like he was really making this place his own. He also built a small shed near the water where he could store his fishing gear, life jackets, and a canoe he'd bought. He planted some native flowers along the shore. He put up a bird feeder near his favorite fishing spot. Little by little, the property was becoming exactly what he'd imagined. Every morning became a ritual. David would wake up at 5:30, make his coffee, grab his rod, and head down to the lake. Sometimes he'd fish for an hour. Sometimes he'd stay until noon. It didn't really matter. Time felt different out there. The stress from all those years of running a business started to melt away. His blood pressure went down. He slept better. He smiled more. His adult kids came to visit and couldn't believe how relaxed their father looked. His daughter told him she hadn't seen him this happy in 20 years. His son asked if he could bring his own kids out to fish sometime. David loved that idea. Maybe he could pass on what his grandfather had taught him all those years ago. Life was perfect, simple, peaceful, exactly what retirement should feel like. And then, 6 months after he'd moved in, David walked out to his mailbox one morning and found a letter that would change everything. The envelope was thick, official-looking, with a return address for something called the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. David had never heard of them before. He opened the letter right there at the mailbox, still holding his coffee mug in his other hand. As he read the words on that page, his peaceful morning suddenly felt a lot less peaceful. The letter was formal and cold. It informed him that he was in violation of multiple HOA regulations. Apparently, his dock was unauthorized. His fishing activities needed prior approval. He had 30 days to remove the dock, stop fishing, and submit proper applications along with something called processing fees. David read the letter 3 times, certain there had to be some kind of mistake. He'd never signed anything about a homeowners association. His lawyer had checked everything. There was nothing in his deed about an HOA, nothing at all. He walked back into his house and immediately called Lisa Patterson. She answered on the second ring, and David could hear the confusion in her voice as he read her the letter. "That doesn't make any sense," she said. "Let me pull up your file and look into this. Can you email me a photo of that letter?" David did exactly that. Then he sat down at his kitchen table and stared out the window at his lake. His perfect, peaceful lake that he owned free and clear. At least that's what he thought. Something told him his quiet retirement was about to get a lot more complicated. David spent the rest of that morning reading the letter over and over again, trying to make sense of it. The more he read it, the more confused he became. The letter talked about violations like he was some kind of criminal. It mentioned rules and regulations he'd never heard of. It demanded fees for things he'd done on his own property. The thing that really bothered him was the tone. It wasn't a friendly, "Hey, we think there might be a misunderstanding" kind of letter. It was cold and threatening. It basically said, "Do what we tell you or else." That didn't sit right with David at all. He called Lisa Patterson again later that afternoon. She'd had time to dig through her files and do some research, and she sounded just as confused as he felt. "David, I've been doing this for 23 years, she said. "I checked every single document when you bought that property. There was absolutely nothing about a homeowners association. No covenants, no restrictions, no recorded documents with the county. Your deed is completely clean. So what do I do?" David asked. "Can they actually make me tear down my dock?" "Not legally, no," Lisa said. "But let me make some calls. I want to find out who these people are and what they think they're doing. In the meantime, don't respond to the letter yet, and definitely don't pay them anything." David agreed to wait, but it was hard. He was the type of person who liked to solve problems right away. Letting things sit didn't feel natural to him. But Lisa knew what she was doing, so he trusted her advice. The next morning, David went down to his lake like always. He brought his fishing rod, his coffee, and tried to enjoy the sunrise. But it wasn't the same. That letter kept running through his mind. He kept thinking about how some group of people he'd never met were telling him what he could and couldn't do on his own land. He caught 2 nice bass that morning, but his heart wasn't in it. The peace he'd been feeling for the past 6 months was gone. replaced by a knot of worry in his stomach. 2 weeks went by. Lisa was still making calls and doing research. David went fishing every morning, partly because he loved it and partly because he wasn't going to let some letter stop him from enjoying his own property. If they had a problem with it, they could come talk to him face to face, and that's exactly what happened. It was a Thursday morning around 10 o'clock. David had just finished fishing and was walking back up to his house when he heard a car coming down his gravel driveway. He wasn't expecting anyone. The sound of tires on gravel got closer, and then a white SUV appeared, so clean and shiny it looked like it had just left the car wash. The SUV stopped near David's gate. He'd installed a simple metal gate across his driveway about 100 feet from the main road. Nothing fancy, just something to mark where his private property began. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped a woman who looked like she meant business. She was probably in her mid-60s, wearing pressed khaki pants and a blue blazer even though it was a warm day. Her gray hair was styled perfectly, and she carried a leather clipboard like it was a weapon. Everything about her screamed, "I'm in charge here." David walked down to the gate, still holding his fishing rod. The woman looked at him with an expression that was somehow both polite and disapproving at the same time. "Mr. Chen," she called out. "That's me," David said, stopping a few feet from the gate. "Can I help you?" "I'm Patricia Whitmore," she said, like her name should mean something to him. "I'm the president of the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. I'm here because you haven't responded to our letter." David set his fishing rod against the fence post. "I got your letter, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm still trying to figure out why you sent it." Patricia's mouth formed a thin line. "It's quite simple, Mr. Chen. Your property falls within our jurisdiction, and you've made several modifications without proper approval. The dock you built requires a permit from the association. Your fishing activities need to be registered, and there are annual inspection fees that haven't been paid." David felt his jaw tighten. He'd spent 30 years dealing with difficult customers, so he knew how to keep his cool. But this was different. This was his home, his retirement, his peace. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said calmly, "I'm not part of your homeowners association. I never signed any papers agreeing to your rules. My property deed doesn't mention your association at all, so I'm not sure what jurisdiction you're talking about." Patricia clicked her pen and made a note on her clipboard. That little gesture annoyed David more than it probably should have. "The previous owner of your property was part of the association," she explained, like she was talking to a child who didn't understand. "That membership automatically transfers when the property is sold. It's standard procedure." "Not according to my lawyer," David said, "and I paid good money to make sure everything was checked properly before I bought this place." Patricia's expression hardened. "Mr. Chen, I don't think you understand the seriousness of this situation. Your property is in what we call the Extended Jurisdiction Zone. This was established when our HOA was formed 15 years ago. All properties within this zone are subject to our bylaws." "Extended Jurisdiction Zone?" David repeated. "That's not a real thing, Mrs. Whitmore. You can't just declare that you have authority over someone's property." "I assure you it's very real," she said, her voice getting sharper. "And it's all documented in our association's founding papers." "Is it documented with the county?" David asked. He might not be a lawyer, but he'd learned a few things over the years. "Because my lawyer checked with the county, and there's nothing filed there about your association having any claim on my land." Patricia's face started to turn red. "Mr. Chen, I came here today to have a reasonable conversation and give you a chance to comply voluntarily. But if you continue to be difficult, we'll have no choice but to pursue other options." "What options?" David asked. He wasn't trying to be difficult. He genuinely wanted to know what she thought she could do. "We can issue fines," Patricia said, consulting her clipboard. $500 per day for each violation. We can file complaints with the county zoning office. We can even place a lien on your property if the fines go unpaid." David felt a chill run through him despite the warm morning. "You're threatening to put a lien on my property? For fishing in my own lake?" "It's not a threat, Mr. Chen. It's the consequence of violating our clearly established rules. Rules that apply to all properties in our jurisdiction." "I'm not in your jurisdiction," David said, his voice firmer now. "This is my land. I own it free and clear. That lake is completely on my property. Every single inch of it. I had it surveyed. I have the papers to prove it." Patricia made another note on her clipboard. Ownership of the land doesn't exempt you from HOA regulations. I suggest you consult with an attorney who understands property law. I have an attorney, David said, and she's already looking into this. Good, Patricia said. Then perhaps she can explain to you why cooperation is in your best interest. She turned to get back in her SUV, then paused. By the way, we've reset the 30-day deadline. It starts today. You have until the 15th of next month to remove that dock and cease all recreational water activities until you've submitted the proper applications. David couldn't believe what he was hearing. I'm not removing my dock, Mrs. Whitmore, and I'm definitely not going to stop fishing. Patricia gave him a look that was half pity, half satisfaction. Like she'd dealt with stubborn people before and knew how things would end. Then I suppose we'll be seeing each other again soon. Perhaps in a more official capacity. She got into her white SUV, did a careful 3-point turn, and drove back down the driveway. David stood there watching until the vehicle disappeared from view, dust hanging in the air behind it. His hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, but from anger, the kind of anger that comes when someone threatens something you've worked hard for. He'd spent 3 years looking for this place. He'd paid his own money for it. He'd done everything legally and properly. And now some woman with a clipboard was trying to tell him he couldn't fish in his own lake. David walked back up to his house and immediately called Lisa Patterson. When she answered, he didn't even say hello. Lisa, the HOA president just showed up at my property. She's threatening fines and liens. We need to figure this out right now. Lisa's voice was calm but serious. Tell me exactly what she said. David recounted the entire conversation, not leaving anything out. When he finished, Lisa was quiet for a moment. Okay, she finally said. Here's what we're going to do. I've been digging into this Meadowbrook Heights Association, and I've found some interesting things. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? I think it's time we put together a response to these people. What kind of response? David asked. The kind that makes it very clear you're not backing down, Lisa said, and the kind that shows them they've picked the wrong person to bully. David felt a small sense of relief. At least he wasn't alone in this fight. I'll be there first thing tomorrow. That night, David couldn't sleep well. He kept thinking about Patricia Whitmore and her clipboard, about the dock he'd built with his own hands, about his quiet mornings by the water that were supposed to be peaceful and simple. He got up at 3 a.m. and made some tea. He sat by his window looking out at the lake, barely visible in the darkness. Somewhere out there, his dock stood in the water. His fish swam below the surface. His property, his land, his little piece of heaven. And nobody was going to take that away from him without a fight. David arrived at Lisa Patterson's office at 8 o'clock the next morning. He'd barely slept, his mind running through everything Patricia Whitmore had said. Lisa's assistant brought him coffee and led him to a conference room where Lisa was already waiting, surrounded by stacks of papers and her laptop open in front of her. Good morning. David, she said, gesturing to a chair. I've got some news for you. Some good, some interesting, and some that's going to make you angry. David sat down and took a sip of his coffee. Hit me with it. I'm already angry, so it can't get much worse. Lisa pulled up a document on her laptop. Let's start with the good news. I found the records from when you bought the property. The previous owner, a man named Robert Henderson, actually was part of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA at one point. But here's the important part. He formally withdrew from the association 5 years before he sold to you. He withdrew? David asked. Can you do that? Absolutely, if the property wasn't part of the original HOA development and if he never signed a permanent covenant, Lisa explained. Mr. Henderson filed all the proper paperwork with the county clerk. There's a recorded document that officially removes his property from any HOA obligations. I have copies right here. David felt a wave of relief. So I'm in the clear? You should be, Lisa said. But here's the interesting part. I also looked up the Meadowbrook Heights HOA's formation. Documents. This so-called extended jurisdiction zone that Patricia mentioned, it doesn't exist in any legal sense. They have it written in their internal bylaws, but they never filed it with the county. It has no legal standing whatsoever. So she was just making it up? Not exactly making it up, Lisa said. I think they wrote it into their own rules and convinced themselves it was legitimate. But property law doesn't work that way. You can't just declare jurisdiction over land you don't own or control. Your deed is clean. You're not part of their association. They have zero authority over your property. David leaned back in his chair, feeling better than he had in days. So what do we do now? Lisa's expression turned serious. Now comes the part that's going to make you angry. I did some more digging into this HOA, and guess what? You're not the first person they've tried this with. I found 3 other property owners in the area who've had similar disputes with Meadowbrook Heights over the past 8 years. 3 other people? David said, sitting forward again. What happened to them? 2 of them eventually just gave up and moved away, Lisa said. The HOA harassed them so much with letters, threats, and complaints to various county offices that they decided it wasn't worth the fight. The 3rd person actually took them to court and won, but only after spending almost 2 years and $15,000 in legal fees. David felt his anger rising again. So they've been doing this for years? Just bullying people off their own property? It looks that way, Lisa said. And here's the thing. Once those people moved, the HOA stopped going after anyone else for a while. Then they'd wait a few years and try again with a new target. It's like they test the waters, see who'll fight back and who won't. Well, I'm not moving, David said firmly. This is my home. I worked my whole life for this place. I know, Lisa said, and I'm ready to fight this with you. But I want you to understand what you might be getting into. Patricia Whitmore and her board, they're not going to back down easily. They're going to make things difficult for you. How difficult are we talking? Lisa pulled out a folder. Based on what happened to the other property owners, you can expect a lot of certified letters with increasing fine amounts. They'll file nuisance complaints with the county about everything they can think of. They might even spread rumors to other people in the area, trying to turn your neighbors against you. David shook his head. I don't even have close neighbors. My nearest neighbor is half a mile away. They'll find a way to make noise, Lisa warned. These HOA boards, especially ones run by people like Patricia, they don't like being challenged. It becomes personal for them. So what's our move? David asked. Lisa smiled. We send them a cease and desist letter. A very clear, very firm letter that explains exactly why they have no authority over your property. We cite the county records, we reference Mr. Henderson's withdrawal, and we tell them in no uncertain terms to leave you alone. And we make it clear that if they continue this harassment, you'll pursue legal action against them. Will that work? Maybe, Lisa said. If they have any sense, they'll back off. But if they don't, we'll be ready for the next step. They spent the next hour crafting the letter together. Lisa did most of the legal writing, but David made sure his voice was in there too. He wanted them to know he wasn't intimidated. The letter went out that afternoon by certified mail. David went home feeling cautiously optimistic. Maybe this would be enough. Maybe Patricia and her board would realize they'd made a mistake and just leave him alone. He should have known better. 3 days later, David got another letter from the HOA. This one was even worse than the first. It claimed he now owed $5,000 in fines for continued violations and failure to comply with association directives. It also stated that they were beginning the process to place a lien on his property. David called Lisa immediately. She told him not to worry, that they couldn't actually place a legal lien since they had no authority over his property, but that they might try to file the paperwork anyway just to cause problems. Then things got really weird. The following week, David drove down to the county zoning office to renew his truck registration. While he was there, one of the clerks mentioned that someone had filed a complaint about his property. Apparently, the complaint claimed his dock was built without proper permits and might be causing environmental damage to the lake. David's blood boiled. He'd pulled all the correct permits before building that dock. He had copies at home. The contractor he'd hired was licensed and had done everything by the book. And environmental damage? He'd paid for water quality testing just a few months ago. His lake was cleaner than most swimming pools. The clerk, a nice woman named Betty who'd worked there for 20 years, gave him a sympathetic look. Mr. Chen, I'll be honest with you. We get complaints from that Meadowbrook Heights group every few months. They seem to like filing reports about their neighbors. Most of the time, the complaints turn out to be nothing. So what do I need to do? David asked. Just bring in your permits and any documentation you have, Betty said. I'll make copies for the file and that should clear it up. But I have to send an inspector out to your property. That's just procedure when a complaint is filed. David brought in all his paperwork the next day. Betty looked everything over and nodded approvingly. Your permits are all in order. The inspector will be out next Tuesday, but I don't think you'll have any problems. The inspector came as scheduled. He was a young guy, probably in his 30s, who seemed more interested in David's fishing setup than in finding violations. He measured the dock, took some photos, tested the water quality, and looked over the construction. "Everything looks good to me," the inspector said, filling out his report. "Whoever filed that complaint was wasting everyone's time. Your dock is built better than most I see out here." David thanked him but felt frustrated. He'd had to take time out of his day, deal with county officials, and stress about something that should never have been an issue in the first place. This was exactly the kind of harassment Lisa had warned him about, but it didn't stop there. 2 weeks later, David was working in his yard when he saw a car he didn't recognize coming down his driveway. It was an older sedan, and inside were 2 people wearing official-looking jackets. They stopped at his gate, and one of them called out, "Mr. Chen, we're from the Meadowbrook Heights HOA inspection team. We need to examine your dock and lake area." David walked down to meet them. "I'm sorry, but you're not coming onto my property." The man, who had a badge clipped to his jacket that said HOA Inspector, looked annoyed. "Sir, we have the authority to inspect properties within our jurisdiction for compliance issues." "No, you don't," David said calmly. "I'm not part of your association. You have no authority here. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The woman with him pulled out a clipboard. Of course she had a clipboard. "Mr. Chen, if you don't allow us access, we'll have to report this as obstruction. That's an additional violation." David pulled out his phone and started recording. "I'm asking you politely to leave my property. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the sheriff." The 2 inspectors looked at each other. The man muttered something under his breath, and they both got back in their car. As they drove away, David made sure to get a clear video of their license plate. He sent the video to Lisa immediately. She called him back within 10 minutes. "David, this is harassment," she said. "They're trying to intimidate you into giving up. But here's what that video just did. It gave us proof of their behavior. If this goes to court, we can show that they're deliberately targeting you." "So we're going to court?" David asked. "I think it's heading that way," Lisa said. "Unless they back off, which at this point seems unlikely. Patricia Whitmore doesn't strike me as someone who admits when she's wrong." That evening, David sat on his dock and watched the sunset. The sky turned orange and pink, reflecting off the calm water. It should have been peaceful. It should have been exactly the kind of moment he'd retired for. Instead, he found himself wondering what the HOA would try next. How far would they push this? And more importantly, how much fight did he have left in him? He thought about those other property owners Lisa had mentioned, the ones who'd just given up and moved away. He understood now why they'd made that choice. This kind of constant pressure, the letters, the complaints, the people showing up at your gate, it wore you down. But as David sat there, watching a fish jump near the far shore, something hardened inside him. This was his place. He'd earned it. He'd done everything right. And he wasn't going to let some power-hungry HOA board take it away from him just because they thought they could. If they wanted a fight, he'd give them one. The letters kept coming. Every single week, like clockwork, David would find another certified mail notice in his mailbox. Each one claimed he owed more money. $5,000 became $8,000, then $12,000. By the end of the second month, the HOA was claiming he owed them $15,000 in fines and fees. David kept every single letter in a folder. Lisa told him documentation was important, so he documented everything. He took photos of the envelopes, scanned the letters, and kept a detailed log of every interaction with the HOA. If this was going to end up in court, he wanted to be ready. But the letters were just the beginning. The real problem started when Patricia and her board decided to get creative with their harassment. One morning, David was down at his dock when his nearest neighbor, a retired teacher named Helen who lived about half a mile away, came walking down his driveway. She looked uncomfortable, like she didn't want to be there but felt she had to come. "David, I'm sorry to bother you," she said, "but I got a strange phone call yesterday. It was from someone at the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. They said your lake might have contamination issues and that it could affect the groundwater in the area." David felt his stomach drop. "What? That's completely false." Helen held up her hands. I know. I told them I'd lived here for 15 years and never had any problems. But they seemed pretty insistent. They said they were just warning neighbors to be aware. "Helen, I had the water tested professionally just a few months ago," David said. "The lake is completely clean. Cleaner than most natural bodies of water. This is just them trying to cause trouble for me." "I figured as much," Helen said with a sympathetic smile. I just wanted to let you know they're calling people. You should probably get ahead of this before they spread it around to everyone. After Helen left, David immediately called Lisa. He was shaking with anger. Spreading false information about environmental contamination wasn't just harassment anymore. It was slander. It could actually affect his property value if people started believing it. They're escalating, Lisa said when David told her what happened. This is actually good for us in a legal sense. The more aggressive they get, the stronger our case becomes. But David, I think it's time we stopped playing defense and went on offense. What do you mean? I mean we file a lawsuit against them, Lisa said. We sue the HOA and Patricia Whitmore personally for harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We make it clear that you're not backing down and that their actions have consequences. David thought about it for a moment. He'd never been the type to sue anyone. In 30 years of running his business, he'd always tried to work things out without lawyers and courts. But this situation was different. They weren't going to stop unless someone made them stop. Okay, David said. Let's do it. Lisa started preparing the lawsuit, but before they could file it, something interesting happened. The HOA filed their own lawsuit first. David got served with papers on a Thursday afternoon. According to the lawsuit, he owed the HOA $15,000 in unpaid fines and fees. They were suing him for the money and asking the court to order him to remove his dock and stop all fishing activities until he complied with their regulations. When Lisa saw the lawsuit, she actually smiled. This is exactly what we needed. How is them suing me a good thing? David asked. Because now we get to bring everything out in court, Lisa explained. They're the ones who initiated legal action, which means we get to defend you and countersue them at the same time. And more importantly, we get to go through a process called discovery. What's discovery? It's where both sides have to share documents and information, Lisa said. We get to request all their internal records, all their communications about you, all their bylaws and policies. We get to depose Patricia and the other board members under oath. And we get to show the judge exactly what they've been doing. Over the next few weeks, Lisa requested documents from the HOA. What they got back was revealing. The HOA's so-called extended jurisdiction zone had never been properly filed with the county. It existed only in their internal paperwork. Even better, Lisa found email exchanges between Patricia and other board members where they specifically discussed targeting property owners who weren't part of the development. In one email, Patricia had written, "We need to establish precedent that our authority extends beyond the development boundaries. If we let these holdouts do whatever they want, it undermines our credibility." Another board member had responded, "What if they fight back?" Patricia's answer, "Most people won't. They'll either pay the fees or move." It's worked before. When David read those emails, he felt sick. These people had been deliberately targeting homeowners as part of some kind of strategy to expand their power. It wasn't a misunderstanding or a mistake. It was intentional. "This is gold," Lisa said when she showed David the documents. "This proves they knew they didn't have legitimate authority. They were just hoping you wouldn't fight back." But the discovery process revealed something even more interesting. Lisa found records showing that 3 years ago, a property owner named Tom Wilson had successfully fought off the HOA in court. The judge in that case had ruled that the HOA had no authority over properties outside the original development, especially when those properties had no recorded covenants. "Why didn't they learn their lesson?" David asked. "Because Tom moved out of state right after winning his case," Lisa explained. "He got his legal fees paid back, but then he left. So Patricia and the board probably figured the precedent didn't matter if no one was around to reference it. They just waited a while and started targeting new people." David shook his head in disbelief. "So they knew they were wrong? They lost in court before and they still came after me?" "Exactly," Lisa said. "Which is why I think we have an excellent chance of not only winning, but getting you compensated for all the trouble they've caused." The harassment didn't stop during the legal process. If anything, it got worse. David started noticing cars driving slowly past his property at odd hours. Nothing threatening exactly, just people clearly checking out his place. It made him uncomfortable. Then one day, he came home from grocery shopping to find someone had filed a complaint with the county health department. The complaint claimed he was dumping waste into his lake. It was completely ridiculous, but it meant another inspector had to come out. Another day of his time wasted proving that nothing was wrong. The health inspector was apologetic. "Mr. Chen, I can see this is a false complaint. Your property is immaculate, but I have to file a report whenever we get a complaint. That's just how it works." "I understand," David said. "Can I ask who filed the complaint?" The inspector hesitated. "It was anonymous, but it came through the Meadowbrook Heights HOA office." Of course it did. David started carrying his phone with him everywhere, ready to record any interactions. He installed security cameras at his gate. He documented everything. Lisa told him that all of this would help their case, but it was exhausting. This wasn't how retirement was supposed to be. His daughter called one evening and asked how he was doing. David tried to sound upbeat, but she could hear the stress in his voice. "Dad, is this really worth it?" she asked. "I mean, I know you love that property, but maybe you could just find somewhere else. Somewhere without all this drama." David looked out his window at the lake, barely visible in the fading light. "Sweetie, if I give up now, they win. And they'll just do this to the next person who buys a property near their development. Someone has to stand up to them." "I know, Dad, I just worry about you." "I'll be okay," David said. "I've got a good lawyer and we've got a strong case. It's just taking longer than I thought it would." What he didn't tell his daughter was how the stress was affecting him. He wasn't sleeping well. His blood pressure was up again. The peace and relaxation he'd found in those first 6 months had completely evaporated. Some mornings he'd go down to his dock and just sit there, not even fishing, just trying to remember why he'd wanted this place so badly. But then he'd catch himself. This was exactly what Patricia and her board wanted. They wanted him stressed and exhausted. They wanted him to give up, and David had never been a quitter. Lisa called him one afternoon with an update. "The court date is set. 3 weeks from now. We'll present our case, they'll present theirs, and the judge will make a ruling." 3 weeks, David repeated. "Feels like this has been going on forever." "I know," Lisa said. "But David, I've been reviewing everything we have, and I feel really good about our position. Their case is weak. Their evidence is basically just their own internal policies that have no legal standing. We have county records. We have the previous owner's withdrawal documents. We have their own emails admitting they're targeting you strategically. Unless something very unexpected happens, I think we're going to win. And if we win, then they have to leave you alone," Lisa said. "Permanently. And we're asking the judge to order them to pay your legal fees. You shouldn't have to pay out of pocket to defend your own property rights." David felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. Maybe this nightmare was finally coming to an end. Those 3 weeks crawled by. David tried to keep busy. He worked in his yard. He organized his shed. He even started planning some improvements to his dock for after the court case was settled. He had to stay positive. The night before the court date, David couldn't sleep at all. He kept running through everything in his mind. What if the judge sided with the HOA? What if he had to pay $15,000? What if they really could force him to tear down his dock? He got up at 4 in the morning and made coffee. He sat by his window watching the darkness slowly give way to dawn. In a few hours, he'd know his fate. Either his retirement dream would survive, or Patricia Whitmore and her clipboard would finally win. David put on his best suit that morning, the one he'd worn to his retirement party 2 years ago. He wanted to look professional and respectful. Lisa had told him that first impressions mattered in court, even though she'd be doing most of the talking. The courthouse was about 40 minutes from his house. David arrived early and found Lisa already there, setting up her materials at one of the tables in the courtroom. She looked calm and confident, which helped settle David's nerves a bit. Patricia Whitmore arrived 15 minutes later with the HOA's attorney, a tall man in an expensive-looking suit who carried a leather briefcase. Patricia was dressed in a navy blue suit and had that same stern expression David remembered from their first meeting. She glanced at David once, her face showing nothing, then sat down at the opposite table. The courtroom started filling up with a few other people. David recognized 2 of the HOA board members who sat behind Patricia. There were also a couple of people he didn't know, probably just observers or people with other cases waiting their turn. Then the bailiff called everyone to stand. Judge Morrison entered from a side door, a woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a bun and reading glasses perched on her nose. She settled into her seat, looked over some papers, and then looked up at both tables. "All right," Judge Morrison said. "I've reviewed the preliminary filings in this case. We have Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association versus David Chen. Let's start with the plaintiff. Counselor, make your case." The HOA's attorney stood up. His name was Mr. Reynolds, and he spoke with the kind of smooth confidence that came from years of courtroom experience. He explained that David had purchased property that fell within the HOA's jurisdiction, that he'd failed to follow proper procedures for modifications to the property, and that he owed substantial fines for multiple violations. Mr. Reynolds presented the HOA's bylaws, their internal documents about the extended jurisdiction zone, and a calculation of all the fines they claimed David owed. He made it sound very official and proper, like David had simply ignored clear rules that everyone else followed. When he finished, Judge Morrison turned to Lisa. "Ms. Patterson, your response?" Lisa stood up, and David could see she was ready. "Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about property rights. Mr. Chen purchased his property legally with a clean deed that contains no HOA restrictions whatsoever. The plaintiff is attempting to claim authority they simply don't have." Lisa pulled out her first document. "This is the deed to Mr. Chen's property. As you can see, there are no covenants, conditions, or restrictions related to any homeowners association. The property is owned free and clear." She placed another document on top. "This is a recorded withdrawal document from the previous owner, filed with the county clerk 5 years before Mr. Chen purchased the property. It formally removes the property from any HOA obligations." Judge Morrison picked up both documents and read them carefully. David watched her face, trying to figure out what she was thinking, but her expression gave nothing away. "Now, Your Honor," Lisa continued, "the plaintiff claims Mr. Chen's property falls within something they call an extended jurisdiction zone. We've searched the county records extensively. This zone doesn't exist in any legal filing. It appears only in the HOA's internal documents." Mr. Reynolds stood up. "Your Honor, if I may, the extended jurisdiction zone was established in the HOA's founding documents when the association was formed 15 years ago. Was it filed with the county?" Judge Morrison asked. Mr. Reynolds hesitated. "It was included in our bylaws, Your Honor." "That's not what I asked," the judge said. "Was it recorded with the county as a legally binding document?" "No, Your Honor, but—" Judge Morrison held up her hand. "I'll hear the rest of your argument in a moment. Ms. Patterson, continue." Lisa pulled out another stack of papers. "Your Honor, we've also discovered that this isn't the first time the Meadowbrook Heights HOA has attempted this. 3 years ago, a property owner named Tom Wilson successfully defended against an identical claim from this same HOA. The ruling in that case clearly stated that the HOA has no authority over properties outside the original development that have no recorded covenants." "I'm familiar with that case," Judge Morrison said, looking directly at Mr. Reynolds. "In fact, I was the judge who heard it." David saw Patricia shift uncomfortably in her seat. Mr. Reynolds cleared his throat. "Your Honor, that was a different circumstance." "It appears to be exactly the same circumstance," Judge Morrison interrupted. "Ms. Patterson, do you have anything else?" "Yes, Your Honor," Lisa said. She was clearly enjoying this now. "We'd like to submit email communications between HOA board members that we obtained during discovery. These emails show that the board knowingly targeted property owners outside their legitimate jurisdiction as a strategy to expand their authority." She handed copies to the judge and to Mr. Reynolds. David watched Patricia's face go pale as the judge read through the emails. Judge Morrison's expression remained neutral, but she was reading slowly, and David could tell she was taking it all in. After a long moment, Judge Morrison looked up. "Ms. Whitmore, these emails are from your account." "Did you write these?" Patricia stood up awkwardly. "Your Honor, I was simply trying to maintain standards in the community." "That's not what I asked," Judge Morrison said firmly. "Did you write emails stating that you were targeting property owners who weren't part of the association?" Patricia's voice was quieter now. "Yes, Your Honor, but—" "And were you aware of the previous court ruling that said the HOA had no authority over such properties?" Patricia didn't answer right away. Mr. Reynolds leaned over and whispered something to her, but Judge Morrison interrupted. "Ms. Whitmore, answer the question." "I was aware of the previous case, yes," Patricia finally said. Judge Morrison set the papers down and removed her glasses. "All right, I've seen enough. Mr. Reynolds, does your client have any other evidence that establishes legal authority over Mr. Chen's property?" Mr. Reynolds shuffled through his papers. "Your Honor, we have the testimony of board members who can attest to the long-standing practice. Practice doesn't create legal authority. Judge Morrison said. Do you have recorded covenants? Filed jurisdictional documents? Any legal instrument that gives your client power over property they don't own? Mr. Reynolds looked defeated. No, Your Honor. Judge Morrison put her glasses back on and made some notes. The courtroom was completely silent except for the sound of her pen on paper. David's heart was pounding. This was it. This was the moment that would determine everything. Finally, Judge Morrison looked up. I'm ruling in favor of the defendant, Mr. Chen. The plaintiff has failed to demonstrate any legal authority over the defendant's property. Mr. Chen's deed is clear and unencumbered. The previous owner's withdrawal from the association was properly documented and recorded. The so-called extended jurisdiction zone has no legal standing. David felt relief wash over him like a wave. Lisa reached over and squeezed his hand, but Judge Morrison wasn't finished. Furthermore, I'm deeply troubled by what I've seen here today. This HOA knowingly pursued legal action against a property owner, despite being aware of previous court rulings against them. They engaged in harassment, filed false complaints with county offices, and spread defamatory information about the defendant's property. The judge looked directly at Patricia. Ms. Whitmore, this behavior is unacceptable. HOAs serve important functions in communities, but they have boundaries. Both literal boundaries in terms of geography and legal boundaries in terms of their authority. You've crossed both. Patricia looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I'm ordering the plaintiff to cease all contact with Mr. Chen regarding his property. Judge Morrison continued. No more letters, no more complaints, no more inspection attempts. Additionally, the plaintiff will pay Mr. Chen's legal fees in full. Ms. Patterson, please submit your invoice to the court. Yes, Your Honor, Lisa said. And Ms. Whitmore, the judge added, I strongly suggest that your board consult with a qualified real estate attorney before you attempt anything like this again. Because if I see another case like this from your HOA, I will not be nearly as lenient. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Honor, Patricia said quietly. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. We're adjourned. David sat there for a moment, almost unable to believe it was over. He'd won. The nightmare was finally finished. Outside the courthouse, Lisa was beaming. That went even better than I expected. When the judge revealed she'd handled the previous case, I knew we had it. And ordering them to pay your fees? That's the icing on the cake. How much will that be? David asked. About $12,000, Lisa said, which they'll have to pay within 30 days. You shouldn't be out a single penny for defending your own property rights. David shook his head in amazement. I can't believe it's really over. It's over, Lisa confirmed. They can't touch you now. You can fish in your lake every single day for the rest of your life, and there's nothing they can do about it. 3 weeks later, David received a check for $12,000 along with a formal letter of apology from the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. The letter was brief and clearly written by their attorney, but it acknowledged that they had no authority over his property and committed to no further contact.